Okay, so I'm excited to be here with Jay Parkinson. Jay, thanks so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me, for sure.
Awesome. Jay is a leader, a physician leader who has been at the forefront of new models of care, of technology for a number of years now. And you're working on some really interesting new projects in the space of AI and keeping clinicians in the loop, really, as we're building AI. So excited to talk to you on many things. But maybe first, my first question is, tell us about this new project and kind of what led you to start this new company.
Yeah, it's interesting. But there's a little bit of a surprise twist to this, so I'm excited about talking to you about that. So yeah, I mean, I've always built like doctor practices, and I've always built things that are pretty cutting edge, I think, especially around care delivery. And I was just kind of like getting burned out, as you do, and needed a little bit of a fresh take on healthcare. It can you need to find those for your own sanity on a pretty regular basis. And so, yeah, I mean, obviously, AI is a new frontier. And what does AI mean to healthcare? The idea, it's called Automate Clinic, kind of started off as, we're doctors that help train AI models. But in a lot of ways, what's fascinating about that is that there are very few people actually like building models that can be trained.
Yeah.
So I think it's too early, honestly. And so I think the most important thing here is, well, maybe models don't need to be trained right now. Maybe technology and products need to be designed, that are in the AI world to better fit into clinical workflows. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, that's kind of like, what we're pursuing now. Thinking that, maybe doctors training AI models, maybe the industry will figure that out in a few years' time. And it'll be before that.
Interesting, interesting. I love how you are evolving with like what you're realizing. We're all learning as things are just moving quickly and are at the forefront of things. So that's even an evolution, I feel like, since we kind of chatted initially. And I'm curious to dig into that more actually. Like what are you seeing in terms of like with Automate Clinic, who are your customers you're working with now and what gave you this insight that it's actually not about training the models necessarily, but getting doctors more involved in building or giving feedback, I guess, around AI specific products.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, it's early, right? And I think the risk that you take, I try to build in public. I try to
Yeah.
like, I kind of try to write and learn, and through writing, it brings up, interesting conversations with people. And, based on those conversations, I just think it's too early. I mean, OpenAI, Anthropic, Google, they're training big, huge models, spending, hundreds of millions of dollars to do that. Nobody's doing that in healthcare, right? And so there's not a specific healthcare foundation model out there, um, because they're expensive and healthcare is hard. Also, all these models were built on like less than minimum wage sort of human training.
Yeah.
And what do you do whenever doctors are asking, 150, $200 an hour? And so I think that's interesting. I think it's a pickle that the industry's in, because you're just like, well, now I guess we're sort of relegated to healthcare is just one industry that OpenAI and others in the labs are trying to figure out. And every tech company out there has gotten their, butt handed to them whenever they try to get into healthcare.
Totally.
No, it's probably not going to be that much different in AI,
Yeah.
even
Yeah.
though I think everybody recognizes the importance of sort of clinician-led AI development.
Yeah, it really the conundrum is real. And I've talked to several companies who are working on, fine-tuning models with the help of clinicians. And I think that part is really tricky because how do you find clinicians who are, yeah, able to kind of be that human in the loop and do that work? I think you can do it for maybe the span of a couple hours or a couple weeks, but like the thousands of hours it takes to be involved in that training is really hard to get people to figure out that cost equation, like you said. So that's
Yeah.
that's really fascinating.
I think so. I mean, I think a lot of it is whenever you think about what sort of asynchronous care is like the thing that we built at Sherpa, in a lot of ways, like, what if those patients weren't real? but what if the physicians were interacting as if they're patients? So in a lot of ways, I think the design and collaboration, if it looks and feels more like real patients rather than like data labeling,
Yeah.
I think that's a different story. So we were definitely going down that path, and we still are in a lot of ways. We're just trying to figure out like what's the right sort of when is the right time? Because good ideas are about just like the right time more than anything in healthcare.
And you're a repeat founder. And I think what was interesting in our other conversation too was just to hear some of your lessons learned about how you're thinking about building a company this time. So I'm curious to kind of like have you share some of that as well again. Like what are some insights from what you've previously built that you are trying to apply now? You mentioned like building in public is an interesting one where you're just very transparent about what's working, what isn't, writing about it, sharing and kind of iterating. So that's awesome. And I'm appreciative of that as a fellow builder. That's great to have that community. Any other kind of like lessons you're really trying to be intentional about this time around?
Yeah, it's like it's interesting because I think people, well, two things. I think people appreciate the hustle rather than the rightness or wrongness. And I think a lot of people wish they were entrepreneurs, but sort of don't have it in them or can't figure out how to get started or something like that. So I think the hustle is the thing that people really like care about, you know? And to be right and wrong, well, to be right is just kind of boring. To be wrong and learn from it is pretty interesting, you know?
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah, that levels up, right? Like
yeah,
that's
totally.
the real way you level up. To be right is like maybe you've like, struck there's a mix of luck and like skill involved, but you never know really what's what, right? And so at least from being wrong, you can learn and accumulate that like skill over time.
And it takes a lot just to like, I think to just get over your ego in a lot of ways to just be like publicly wrong. And I just think that's fascinating. And it's somewhere I want to go with my career, because again, the conversations that happen because you've written something is where the magic's at. And people want to talk. People want to share ideas. And so, yeah, I'm just really, everything great that's ever happened to me is because I've written something and somebody read it, resonated with them, and led to a conversation, and that led to something really cool. So,
That's awesome. That's it's so interesting. I feel like with even how we met through LinkedIn and sort of like, I read your writing. It's been a new thing for me to be writing and to be kind of putting myself out there a little bit more. And I used to do that a lot internally, like when I was at Meta, that's a big part of the culture is writing and people kind of interacting on thought based on writing. And that's great. But like to now do this in the context of like as an entrepreneur myself. It's very vulnerable, but it's also remarkable when, we're getting messages from people I don't know who are so excited about the work or who want to connect. And you never know kind of what will come back what will come back to you when you put something out there. So I am inspired by your motivation around this. I like it.
yeah, one of my favorite songs is called "The Late Greats" by Wilco, and it's a song about like the best song that's ever been recorded was or ever been sung was never like recorded. And nobody's really heard it because they didn't really have the means to record or something like that, or they were, one of the lines is about, oh, they just weren't good looking enough, you know,
Yeah.
and so
Yeah.
they weren't like, pretty enough to be in a rock band. So
They didn't fit the package.
yeah, yeah, totally. So that's kind of, I don't know, the way I think about things. But the other thing that I think is interesting is timing again. So it's about the right time for the idea. But the other one is like, how long do you put into an idea? Like, sure,
Mm,
it was 9 years and maybe it should have been four? And so, how do you get as many bats as possible? Because again, like, healthcare is really hard. And
yeah.
well, like at bats more than like just diving into an idea and get too attached to it.
Which is also really hard to do in healthcare, right? Because the cycles of change take time. And
Yeah.
so how do you balance that? How do you balance thinking about like this is, and it's also more delicate, like failing and building something that's like not going to work or, kind of is less high quality, like feels much more challenging to do in healthcare than it like the bar of what an MVP is very different, right? So how do you navigate that in how you think about building this?
Well, and like it's that like let's see. there's so many great ideas in healthcare that need to exist, yet the business model is not there to support them. And
Hmm.
so that's the hardest part about healthcare is like right idea, right business model, right revenue at the right time, you know? And
Yeah.
so,
Because these
you
things
know,
are like sitting in disconnected places. Like,
yeah,
yeah.
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 And it's just, it's frustrating, but at the same time, I guess that's, as an entrepreneur, you have to appreciate pain, And so, yeah,
It's a
that's
it's a
figure it
crazy
out.
journey. Yeah, interesting. Well, I wanted to touch on your insights, maybe more broadly around clinicians diving into AI right now. And as a clinician who's been, on the front lines for a long time, and also now as somebody who's very versed in what AI can do, what are you sharing in terms of, with other clinicians, with people who you bring on about how clinicians should think about AI? And integrating it or not integrating into their practice.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that I've like figured out over the last year was that like nobody actually knows what they're doing in terms of AI and building AI and trying to make it accurate. I thought it was kind of like behind the curve and trying to figure, I just thought like people had figured it out and I'm like so late to the game. And, you kind of dive in and you realize like, oh goodness gracious, everybody's just winging it. And
We're all figuring it out.
yeah, in real time. And it's rapidly advancing, but at the same time, it seems like it's rapidly advancing in the labs, not so much outside of the labs. I think as clinicians, you hear sort of pockets of, well, hey, there's a clinician or two working at an AI inbox company, helping, doctors respond to messages. But again, they don't have access to the foundation models. So, they're kind of just building prompts and things like that.
Mhm.
I still think it's early. I mean, once we figure out like DeepSeek was allowed, it cost about what $7 million to train that model versus 300 million for
Yeah.
open models. So once you have like DeepSeek trained on like really good healthcare data, it seems like that's when clinicians will likely get more involved. But you might be paying, 20 times more to train the model with like human clinicians versus how much it costs to create it. So yeah.
I'm curious to actually, as I think about what we're seeing with Vibrant, which is we're using base models and then we're adding some knowledge base to it that is tuned towards especially functional integrative longevity care. So it kind of tunes towards those kinds of practices. But what's interesting is actually how well it does even now, where it's not like we're not changing much around the base model. It's actually it grounds in the patient chart data. So we have that as, reference. And then we have all this. But what's been really fascinating is like how well it does. But I'm curious like where the edges are that you found that you feel like maybe these models, even with like that kind of approach, it's not quite hitting the mark, and what you think is coming.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, right? I mean, I think what you're describing is like something that might be like 85% good, you know? Um,
Mhm.
when you look at a lot of medications, I mean, the old mantra is like, a third of people, it harms, a third of people, it does nothing, a third of people, it helps, you know? What if you use that as like the baseline comparison to like AI, like 85% like good is pretty exceptional, you know?
Yeah.
So, I
And
mean, I think,
then the way we build for the safety guard at the safeguard against the 15% where it doesn't work is you keep that human in the loop, right? And you make sure that there is nothing going out to patients without a clinician actually reviewing, verifying, editing, all of that. So that's kind of the mode we're taking right now. But I guess in the future, when you think of like, okay, if it's 100% good, if we get to close that loop, does that mean you don't need clinicians? Like, where do you think the role of the clinician kind of starts to interplay with AI?
I don't know. I think, just thinking on like a really sort of, moderately complicated issue. One of my loved ones had an emergency surgery like 2 weeks ago, and I was there for the whole thing. And, being there as a doctor witness, but also talking with the surgeon, I thought back on that to be like, what was the role of AI here?
Mm,
It kind of like there wasn't that much.
nothing, right? Yeah, exactly. In that case, you're like, no, you need hands. I mean, maybe there's robots, but not even really. Like, there's certain things, right? So, yeah,
Yeah.
there's
So
there's human touch.
I think the real interesting question here is like, okay, if these things are going to be co-pilots, and say the co-pilot is like 85% good, like what's the interface between that doctor and that 85% co-pilot? Like, if there's a pilot flying a plane and the co-pilot's like 85% good, like, most of the time that pilot's gonna just take over because you can't rest the 15%,
Mm-hmm,
you
mm-hmm.
know? So I think that's the question of the next 10 years is like, how do you work alongside something that's like, just notoriously, you know, kind of kind of good enough?
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
gonna be interesting to see though, because like, when it is good enough, like it's so helpful.
There are ways I reflect on my workflows as a non-clinician using AI and like where it's sort of it's for writing for example or things like that where it's not sufficient to just write for me or maybe my prompts are not good enough or whatever, but even when you like really fine tune prompts and try to get writing out of it, it's not, it lacks, right? It kind of doesn't get the right like, and so then it's, I think of it more as if a really helpful kind of first draft like thought partner. And I think from the start I feel like a lot of creatives and folks who are using AI in their workflows, that idea of the first draft. And that's actually kind of how we frame it too in Vibrant. Like it's a first draft of a care plan or first draft of like an analysis. And instead of fully supplementing your thought or your work product, it is just sort of accelerating your capacity to do a thing, which I think then, that maybe is where the good enough actually is really valuable because it hopefully saves a lot of time in a way that it otherwise wasn't saving but it's not automating out everything necessarily.
I mean, the fun thing is like it's the simple stuff should be pretty automated going forward. Yeah.
Totally,
Well, that's
totally.
great. It frees clinicians up to, practice at the top of their license, focus more on prevention, focus more on like, connecting and having like real conversations with people.
Yeah,
Um, and also focusing on like, just those weird edge cases that like they don't feel like, turning over to AI is a good idea,
yeah.
So yeah, so I mean, I don't know. I'm excited about like that transition, but it's more of like a weird human behavior problem than a technical problem in a lot of ways.
It's how to think about like now this thing that's like part of your workflow, but you don't know where exactly and how exactly to trust it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that's super interesting.
Yeah. So let's see. Well, it's the next 5, 10 years, I think it's going to be fascinating for the profession. So.